Long before grand avenues were laid, the foundations of this civilization were forged by the simplest of acts, a seed placed deliberately into the earth. Imagine this scene nearly 9,000 years ago. The landscape where modern Pakistan now lies was different, lushier, perhaps kinder. Here, in scattered clusters, people decided to stop wandering. They built the first humble shelters from mud and straw, rectangles just large enough for a family. You can almost see the imprints in the archaeological record, the packed earth floors, stained by ancient hearths, the indentations of storage pits, lined carefully with plaster. These weren't just houses. They were statements of hope. For the first time, people were investing in a specific tomorrow, storing surplus grain against an uncertain future. What did they grow in those nascent fields? They nurtured strains of wheat and barley, painstakingly developed over generations to thrive in this specific patch of soil. Remarkably, they didn't borrow this knowledge from Mesopotamia or other distant cultures. This was an independent awakening, a parallel discovery of agriculture's power, happening simultaneously across the world. They also cultivated peas, pressed sesame for oil, and harvested dates. Their fields became a diverse larder. But their innovation didn't stop with plants. Outside those simple dwellings, a quieter revolution was unfolding. They managed herds of goats and sheep. But their most transformative partnership was with two great beasts, the sturdy zebu cattle with its distinctive hump and the powerful water buffalo. Taming these animals changed everything. They provided milk and meat, yes, but more importantly, they provided muscle. With draft animals to pull plows, these early farmers could work the earth more deeply, more efficiently. This animal power was the engine that would eventually produce the agricultural surplus necessary for society to grow beyond mere subsistence. And with stability came the birth of craft, the human desire to create beyond utility. From the earth itself, they shaped their first pottery, simple, hand-formed vessels fired in open pits. But human ingenuity is rarely content. Over centuries, the potter's wheel was introduced, and by 5500 BC, those simple pots had transformed. They became canvases adorned with geometric patterns and stylized animals, their designs echoing across settlements. This consistency in decoration whispers to us across time. It suggests shared stories, a common identity beginning to coil itself around these scattered communities. They also began a conversation with metal. Small copper ornaments and tools appear in the record around 4500 BC. The process of smelting or of applying fire and skill to extract a malleable metal from stone represents a leap in technological thinking. That copper likely came from nearby hills, implying another crucial development: trade. The movement of raw materials over distance signals the first delicate threads of a network, the beginnings of economic connection. All of this occurred within a generous cradle. The great Indus River system, fed by Himalayan snow and seasonal monsoons, was the lifeblood. Unlike the volatile Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus flooded with a relative predictability that farmers could trust. Each summer, the waters would rise, spread, and then recede, leaving behind a fresh blanket of fertile silt. This natural rhythm allowed for planning, for the development of irrigation channels that snaked out from the riverbanks. The river was more than a source of water and soil, it was a highway. Its currents carried not just water, but ideas, goods, and people, binding the region together. For millennia, this was the slow, steady rhythm of life. Plant, harvest, trade, create. Communities grew. Techniques refined. But could these farming villages ever coalesce into something greater? What pressures or aspirations would push them toward the idea of a city? The answers lay in the accumulation of small changes, a gathering wave of complexity that would soon break upon the shores of history. Continue, and please never write words more than 1,000 in each portion, it's essential. The gathering wave did not crash suddenly, but built its force over centuries. Picture the scene around 3500 BC. The small, agrarian hamlets began to evolve, their outlines shifting, becoming more defined, more purposeful. At places like Kot Diji, we see the first tangible signs of a society thinking defensively, collectively. Walls of mud brick rise, not just around individual homes, but encircling the entire community. The construction of such barriers speaks volumes. It required organized labor, a shared goal, and perhaps a shared fear. Was it protection from rival groups, or from the increasingly unpredictable climate? The walls themselves hold their silence, but their presence marks a turning point. Inside these fortified settlements, life became more specialized. The archaeological layers revealed distinct neighborhoods. Here, a concentration of clay and kiln debris marks the potter's quarter. There, fragments of slag and crucibles point to the metalworker's domain. In another area, tiny, unfinished stone beads litter the ground. This separation of craft is critical. It means not every person was directly tied to the soil. A class of artisans was emerging, supported by the agricultural surplus. Their work showed astonishing standardization. Pottery vessels, for instance, began to follow such uniform shapes and sizes that it suggests either centralized workshops or a remarkably effective spread of technical blueprints. This standardization was mirrored in the realm of commerce, which was stretching its reach dramatically. Imagine a trader unrolling a cloth bundle to reveal a pendant of lapis lazuli, its deep blue flecked with gold-like pyrite. This stone originated in mines hundreds of miles away, in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan. Yet here it was in a town on the Indus plains. Seashells from the distant Arabian coast found their way inland. Turquoise from Persia, copper from Rajasthan. These materials began to circulate along established routes. This was no longer casual barter between neighbors. This was a web of economic interdependence, binding distant communities in a network of mutual need. Such complex trade demanded systems. It required trusted weights and measures. Archaeologists have found precisely shaped stone cubes, their masses following consistent mathematical ratios. A merchant in one town could weigh a quantity of grain or lapis using a stone cube, confident that a trader in another settlement, using an identical cube, would agree on the amount. This implied a breathtaking level of shared understanding and trust across a vast landscape. It also hints at the need for record-keeping, for agreements that extended beyond memory. Did a primitive form of accounting emerge here, in response to the intricacies of long-distance exchange? With material complexity came social differentiation. The egalitarian veil of the earliest villages began to thin. Look at the burial sites from this proto-urban period. In some graves, bodies are interred with simple pottery, perhaps a single tool. In others, we find collections of finely made vessels, necklaces of beads, and copper mirrors. These differences in grave goods are quiet but potent testimonies. They suggest that status, wealth, or authority had begun to stratify the community. Yet, it's crucial to note, even the richest burials of this era are modest. There are no vast treasure chambers, no retinues of sacrificed servants. The social pyramid, if it existed, had a very low, gentle slope. The technological tempo accelerated. The potter's wheel became commonplace, spinning out uniform vessels with efficient rhythm. Kilns grew more sophisticated, reaching higher temperatures that yielded stronger ceramics and better metals. The principle of rotary motion, once mastered for clay, likely sparked innovations in other fields. Perhaps the first cart wheels, solid discs of wood, began to turn on the dusty tracks between settlements. And through it all, the partnership with the water buffalo deepened. This animal, supremely adapted to marshy conditions, proved to be a game changer. While other cattle struggled in wet fields, the buffalo could haul a plow through saturated soil. This allowed farmers to cultivate land previously considered marginal, pushing the green fringe of agriculture further out. The buffalo was a living tractor, a milk producer, and eventually, a beast of burden capable of moving heavy trade goods. Its domestication was as transformative as the invention of a new tool. By 3000 BC, the stage was set. The ingredients were all present: agricultural surplus, specialized crafts, expanding trade routes, evolving social structures, and a toolkit of growing technological sophistication. These communities were poised on a precipice, looking out across a valley of possibility. They had mastered the art of village life. But could they build something entirely new? Could they conceive of a symphony of stone, brick, and human intentions so grand it would echo for millennia? The next century would provide an answer so startling, it would redefine what was possible in the ancient world. The answer came not with the fanfare, but with the quiet, deliberate sound of millions of bricks being laid. Between 2600 and 2500 BC, the Indus Valley witnessed a transformation so rapid and complete it still staggers the mind. It was an urban revolution. The scattered, evolving towns seemed to draw a collective breath, and upon exhaling, produced fully formed, meticulously planned cities. This was not gradual growth. It was a conscious leap into a new way of being. Consider Harappa. What had been a sizable settlement erupted into a metropolis covering over 150 hectares. Its layout reveals a mind of astonishing organizational power. The city was divided into two distinct sectors. To the west, raised high on an artificial mound, stood the citadel. Fortified by massive walls of fired brick, some 6 meters thick, it was a district of control and possibly ceremony. Its gateways were not mere openings, but carefully designed bottlenecks, controlling the flow of people and ideas. To the east sprawled the lower town, and here lies the true marvel, a perfect grid. Streets ran in precise cardinal directions, north-south and east-west, with the unerring accuracy of a surveyor's dream. Wide main arteries, some 10 meters across, intersected at right angles with smaller secondary streets, which in turn fed into narrow lanes serving residential blocks. This geometric order wasn't accidental. It speaks of a central authority with the vision to plan and the power to enforce. An authority capable of imagining an entire city before a single foundation was dug. What kind of governance could achieve such harmony without the whip of an obvious tyrant? Then, there is Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, a name that belies the vibrant, humming city it once was. Here, the citadel holds one of antiquity's most enigmatic structures, the Great Bath. Imagine a rectangular pool, precise as a gemstone, lined with finely fitted bricks sealed with bitumen to be waterproof. Steps lead down into its depths. It was not a public swimming pool. It was a ritual center, an architectural embodiment of purity. Surrounding it were galleries and rooms, suggesting this was a place of congregation, of ceremony. Next to it stood a massive granary, its foundations designed with ventilation channels to keep stored grain dry, a testament to centralized planning for communal survival. But the genius of these people is perhaps most vividly seen not in their grandest monuments, but in their humility toward the mundane. It is seen in the sewers. Every house in Mohenjo-Daro connected to a comprehensive, city-wide drainage system. Covered brick channels ran beneath the streets, with manholes for maintenance. Wastewater flowed from homes into these conduits, through settling tanks to remove solid matter, and away from the living spaces. This wasn't a luxury for the elite, it was a standard for all. In an age where many great cities left waste to fester in open gutters, the Indus Valley citizens engineered a system of public health that would not be rivaled for millennia. Their bricks tell a similar story of standardized brilliance. Across hundreds of kilometers, from Harappa to distant outposts, baked bricks were produced in a consistent ratio, length to width to thickness, 4 to 2 to 1. This uniformity wasn't just about neatness. It meant efficiency in construction, ease of repair, and the ability to replicate architectural plans anywhere in their realm. It implies quality control, centralized guidelines, and a shared technical language that transcended local dialects. How did they manage such coherence across such vast distances? Where were the shouting kings, the boastful inscriptions proclaiming their glory? The silence is deafening. We see no colossal palaces, no towering temples celebrating a single ruler or god. The largest buildings seem designed for public utility, The bath, the granary, the fortified citadel that may have served as a communal refuge. This absence shouts a profound question. Did they build a civilization not for the ego of the one, but for the benefit of the many? Was their greatest innovation not brick or sewer, but a form of social contract lost to time? The mystery deepens when we look at their homes. Even in the lower town, domestic architecture speaks of comfort, privacy, and dignity. Houses were turned inward, with blank outer walls facing the streets. Doors and windows opened onto inner courtyards, private oases sheltered from dust, noise, and prying eyes. Most homes had their own wells and were connected to that miraculous sewer system. The gap between wealthy and modest dwellings existed, but it was a chasm of degrees, not an abyss. Everyone had access to clean water and sanitation, a radical notion of civic welfare. So, what powered this elegant, clean, and seemingly peaceful machine? The answer, it seems, lay in commerce and craftsmanship. They had become a networked civilization, a mercantile powerhouse whose influence stretched from the Afghan highlands to the Gujarati coast. But how did they administer such a vast economic enterprise without leaving behind the edicts of rulers? The clues are small, stone, and utterly captivating. The clues are small, stone, and etched with silent eloquence. The seals. Thousands have been found, typically squares of steatite about the size of a postage stamp. Upon them, exquisitely carved, we find the quiet menagerie of the Indus world. A proud bull, a ponderous elephant, a mythic unicorn-like creature. And above these animals, a brief sequence of symbols, the still undeciphered script. These were not mere decorations. A seal was a signature, a brand, a certificate of authenticity. Pressed into clay used to secure a bale of goods or the rope around a storage jar, it created a tamper-proof mark. Finding identical seals in Harappa and in a distant port town means that a merchant, or a guild, or an official had a recognized identity that carried weight across the entire civilization. This points to the true lifeblood of their society, a sophisticated, standardized commercial empire. Their weights and measures reached a level of precision that feels almost modern. Cubical stone weights followed a dual system, binary and decimal, with astonishing consistency. A unit weighing about 13.7 grams could be doubled, redoubled, and doubled again. Across sites separated by vast distances, weights of the same denomination vary by less than 1%. Think of the implication. A trader in the bustling lanes of Mohenjo-daro could measure out a quantity of cotton or grain using a carved stone cube, and a partner in a far-off settlement, using an identical cube from his own set, would agree on the exact amount. This is more than convenience. It is the foundation of trust in long-distance relationships. It is the tangible bedrock of an economy that must have run on credit, on promises, and on reputation. And what goods flowed along these channels of trust? The inventory is a map of their world. Lapis lazuli journeyed from the mines of Badakhshan in Afghanistan. Carnelian and agate came from Gujarat. Copper arrived from Rajasthan, tin from sources still unknown. There were shells from the southern coast, ivory from forest interiors, gold, turquoise, and fragrant woods. This was not just trade in luxuries for an elite few. The scale suggests commerce woven into the very fabric of society, supplying craftsmen with materials and citizens with goods from a world they would never see. The craftsmen themselves achieved something verging on artistry through industry. In workshops, they mass-produced pottery of such consistent form that it feels factory-made. They perfected the lost wax casting technique for bronze, creating objects like the famous dancing girl figurine from Mohenjo-daro. A slight, confident figure caught in a moment of motion, her arm weighed down with bangles. But perhaps their most breathtaking skill was in something tiny, bead-making. They learned to drill perfect, cylindrical holes through stones as hard as carnelian, using fine bronze drills. The holes are so straight, so consistent, that they speak of specialized tools, jigs, and a level of patience that borders on meditation. These beads, lustrous and precise, became a hallmark of Indus craftsmanship, coveted from Mesopotamia to the Persian Gulf. Indeed, Mesopotamian clay tablets from this era mention a distant land called Mliha, a place that sent exotic treasures: ivory, ebony, carnelian, and peacocks. Scholars believe Mliha was the Indus Valley. Indus seals have been found in Mesopotamian cities like Ur. The connection was real, active, and prestigious. The Indus people were not isolated. They were players in the first globalized network, their reputation built on the unassailable quality of their standardized goods. So, we have a picture of a civilization that seems rational, orderly, and prosperous. A society that built for utility and equality, that mastered logistics and quality control. But humans are not merely economic units. We are creatures of spirit, of fear, and of wonder. Where was the heart in this carefully engineered body? Where did they turn when the rains failed, or a child was born, or life slipped away? The archaeological record offers glimpses, but they are glimpses through a heavy veil. We see small clay figurines of women, often with elaborate headdresses and exaggerated features, perhaps mother goddesses, symbols of fertility. We find fire altars, platforms of brick where offerings might have been made to flickering flames. And of course, the Great Bath itself suggests ritual purification was central, a physical washing that mirrored a spiritual cleansing. Yet there are no great temples. No ziggurats scraping the sky to plead with gods. No pyramids aiming for eternity. Their spirituality, if that's what it was, seems to have been integrated, domestic, perhaps decentralized. It's as if their grandest statement of belief was not a monument to the divine, but the maintenance of a clean, well-ordered city. Was their theology one of harmony rather than supplication? Of balance rather than conquest? This profound order, this network of cities humming with productive efficiency, did not exist in a vacuum. It rested upon the most fragile of foundations, the climate. For centuries, the rivers had been predictable, the monsoons reliable. But environments are not static. They are conversations, and the earth was about to change the subject. The slow, inexorable shifts would first test, then strain, and ultimately transform everything these people had built. The great experiment was entering its most challenging trial. The conversation with the earth began to change in subtle, then insistent ways. For centuries, the Indus civilization had danced to a reliable rhythm: the summer monsoon's arrival, the river's predictable swell, the winter's gentle retreat. But around 2200 BC, the rhythm began to stutter. Paleoclimate data, read from ocean sediments and ancient pollen, tells a story of weakening rains. The monsoon winds, which carried life from the Arabian Sea, grew less robust. The annual delivery of water became less certain, sometimes arriving in violent, concentrated bursts, other times seeming to forget the way altogether. Imagine the anxiety seeping into that well-ordered world. At Mohenjo-Daro, the evidence is in the wells. Archaeologists see them being dug deeper, then deeper again, as the water table retreated. The sophisticated drainage systems, designed for a certain flow, began to falter. With less water to flush them, they could clog, becoming liabilities instead of assets. In the eastern realms of the civilization, along the now-vanished Gagarhakra river system, the crisis was more acute. This once mighty channel, perhaps fed by Himalayan streams that changed course, began to wither. Its life-giving flow diminished to a trickle, then to dust. Towns that had thrived along its banks found themselves stranded in an emerging desert. This was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow, tightening squeeze. A bad harvest year, then a recovery, then 2 difficult years in a row. The pressure was relentless. How did this meticulous society respond? Initially, with characteristic ingenuity. They adapted. At sites like Dhalavira, in the arid reaches of Gujarat, they became masters of water conservation. They built not just wells, but vast, intricate systems of reservoirs, capturing every possible drop of monsoon runoff in stone-lined tanks. They engineered channels and spillways with the precision of hydraulic engineers. They were fighting back with intelligence and collective effort. Agricultural practices shifted. The familiar wheat and barley, thirsty crops, were increasingly supplemented by drought-resistant millets and sorghums. Farmers had to rethink their relationship with the soil, turning to hardier plants that could thrive on less. Settlement patterns began to morph. Some towns along the dying rivers were gradually, orderly abandoned. There's little evidence of panic or violence. Instead, we see a strategic retreat. People seem to have gathered into larger, better provision centers, or migrated towards regions where water was still reliable, like the Gujarat coast. The network was reconfiguring itself under stress. Yet, the very strengths of the Indus system may have become vulnerabilities in this new, erratic world. Their glorious standardization, their complex interdependence, required stability. The trade networks needed predictable surpluses to move. The specialized craftsmen needed steady supplies of raw materials and food from farmers. As environmental stress fractured this equilibrium, the system began to creak. The beautiful uniformity of their pottery started to break down. Handmade vessels reappear alongside wheel-thrown ones. Brick sizes become less standardized, as if the central authority over production was loosening its grip, or as if local communities were simply using whatever they could find. Then came the floods. Paradoxically, in a time of growing aridity, the Indus could also deliver devastating pulses of water. Tectonic shifts upstream might have created temporary natural dams that, when they burst, sent catastrophic walls of water and silt downstream. At Mohenjo-daro, archaeologists find layers of fine sediment between city levels, clear evidence of the city being inundated, then rebuilt, again and again. Each rebuilding required immense effort. Each flood sapped a little more of the civic energy. Imagine the demoralizing cycle, cleaning out homes filled with silt, repairing broken walls, all while wondering if the next season's rains would come at all. Through all this, what of the people themselves? The skeletal remains offer quiet, intimate testimony. They show a population that was generally healthy and well-nourished, with signs of healed fractures that suggest care. There is little evidence of violent trauma. This reinforces the picture of a relatively peaceful society, even in its twilight. But they were not immune to strain. Some bones show the telltale signs of hard labor, of carrying heavy loads. Life was becoming physically harder. The great, silent question hanging over this period is one of governance. Where were the leaders in this crisis? The citadels still stood, but what commands were issued from them? Could the collective, consensus-based model that may have built the cities adapt quickly enough to manage drastic scarcity? Could it make the brutal decisions about resource allocation that kingship often imposes? There are no records of desperate pleas to gods, no monuments erected to commemorate victory over famine. There is only the archaeological record of stubborn resilience, of adaptation, and finally, of a gradual letting go. The urban core, the beating heart of the Indus vision, began to slow. In the uppermost layers of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the perfect street grid begins to blur. New buildings encroach on the wide avenues. Houses are patched with bricks taken from older, abandoned structures. The great civic drains fall into disrepair and are finally blocked, forgotten. It is not destruction, it is entropy. The grand, shared project was winding down. People still lived there, but the urban dream, the belief in that perfect, sanitary, interconnected order, was fading. Yet, to say collapse is to misunderstand what happened. A civilization is not a building that falls. It is a pattern that unravels and reweaves itself into new forms. In the northwest, the great cities dwindled. But in other regions, like Gujarat, life continued with vigor, though in a different key. The knowledge didn't vanish. The craftsmanship, the agricultural techniques, the memory of how to build a proper drain, these survived in the hands and minds of a people who were now dispersing, adapting, and merging with new groups entering the subcontinent. The Indus civilization did not die with a bang. It transformed. It dissipated like the mist from its once great rivers, settling into the very soil of South Asia. Its cities were buried by silt and sand, and by time. Their names were forgotten, but their legacy, like a dormant seed, was waiting. What fragments of their world would persist? What echoes of their ordered, silent society would whisper to the cultures that followed, to the Vedic poets, the Mauryan planners, the countless generations that would call this land home? The story was entering its longest and perhaps most profound chapter. The silence that settled over the abandoned cities was not an ending, but a transition. The grand pattern of urban life unraveled, but the individual threads remained strong, woven now into new, smaller tapestries. For the people of the Indus, the centuries after 1900 BC were not a descent into darkness, but a strategic dispersal, a return to different scales of living. The overwhelming pressure of a changing climate did not destroy them. It forced them to innovate in the oldest way possible, by moving, adapting, and remembering. Picture the scene across the vast Indus sphere. In the heartland, places like Mohenjo-daro were not violently sacked. They were gently released. Families gathered their most precious possessions, the bronze mirrors, the necklaces of carnelian beads, the standardized weights that had guaranteed fair trade, and walked away from the increasingly burdensome maintenance of a metropolis. They moved to smaller, more manageable villages closer to reliable water sources. The technology did not vanish. They still knew how to make pottery on a wheel, how to smelt copper, how to build a house with baked bricks. But now, they did it for a hamlet of kin, not for a city of strangers. In regions like Gujarat and the Punjab, the story had a different rhythm. Here, many settlements showed remarkable resilience. They shrank, yes, and the blinding uniformity of the high period softened, but life continued. Their pottery began to show new influences, different shapes, fresh decorative motifs. This wasn't decline, it was cultural conversation. As trade routes shifted and new groups migrated into the subcontinent, perhaps from the northern hills and western plateaus, ideas mingled. The Indus legacy was not replaced, it was hybridized. A pot might have the sturdy, wheel-thrown form of the old tradition but be decorated with a pattern inspired by a newcomer's aesthetic. This is how cultures truly survive, not by rigid preservation, but by flexible assimilation. What happened to their extraordinary social model? The consensus-based, possibly oligarchic system that ran an empire without palaces likely could not coordinate a desperate fight against continent-scale climate change. Its genius was for management instability, not for emergency mobilization. In its place, smaller, more local forms of organization reasserted themselves. Leadership would have become more personal, rooted in clan and village, focused on immediate survival rather than cosmic order. The great civic idea, that an entire city could be planned for the health and privacy of all, fragmented. But its principles did not die. The respect for clean water, for effective waste management, for domestic privacy, these became part of the subcontinent's common sense, passed down not as law, but as tradition. And what of the spiritual world? The small clay goddess figurines, the fire altars, the emphasis on ritual bathing, these did not require grand temples. They were portable practices. A mother goddess figurine could be carried in a bag. The concept of purification through water could be enacted in a household courtyard or a riverbank. It is tantalizing to see in these practices the deep, ancient roots of what would later become central to Indian spirituality, the reverence for feminine divine energy, the sacredness of fire in Vedic ritual, the purifying power of bathing in rivers like the Ganges. The Indus people may not have passed down a pantheon of named gods, but they may have gifted a grammar of reverence, a set of spiritual intuitions that later cultures would articulate in their own words. Their greatest and most haunting legacy, however, is their silence. The undeciphered script. Those brief, enigmatic sequences of symbols on seals and pottery stand as the ultimate cliffhanger of the ancient world. Were they names? Titles? Trademarks? Prayers? Without a Rosetta Stone, we listen to a conversation in a room we cannot enter. This silence has shaped their story. It forced archaeologists to read a civilization solely through its actions, its bricks, its drains, its beads, rather than its boasts or poetry. In doing so, It presented a vision of an ancient society uniquely focused on material well-being, civic order, and commercial integrity. A society that, perhaps, believed its deeds were monument enough. Centuries rolled on. The ruins of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were slowly buried by river silt and wind-blown sand. Local farmers plowing fields would sometimes turn up strange, fired bricks of perfect proportion, or small stones carved with curious animals. They were puzzles without a context, the scattered pieces of a forgotten game. The memory of the builders faded into folklore, perhaps into myths of a time when giants or gods built great cities. The rediscovery began, as it often does, by accident. In the 19th century, British engineers building the Lahore-Karachi railway needed ballast for the tracks. They found an ancient mound near a village called Harappa that provided perfect, ready-made bricks in staggering abundance. Trainloads of archaeological history were crushed to stabilize railway beds. It was a destruction that now makes us wince, but it was also the first clue. Some of those bricks found their way to curious antiquarians. They noticed something extraordinary. These were not just old bricks. They were of a standardized size and quality that spoke of a lost, advanced technology. Systematic archaeology would eventually peel back the layers. In the 1920s, excavations at Mohenjo-daro revealed the staggering truth: a vast, planned city older than any known in India. The discovery of the Great Bath, the grid streets, the sophisticated drains, sent shockwaves through the understanding of history. Here was not a primitive precursor, but a peer to Egypt and Mesopotamia. A mature, sophisticated civilization that had been entirely erased from human memory. Modern archaeology, with satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and precise climate science, continues to piece the puzzle together. We now see the true scale, over 1,000 sites across 1 million square kilometers. We trace the dead rivers and understand the environmental pressures. We analyze pottery styles to map the slow transformation. Each discovery adds depth, but also mystery. The legacy of the Indus Valley civilization, therefore, is twofold. First, it is a practical legacy etched into the land and the people. Their agricultural innovations, their understanding of water management, their craftsmanship in metallurgy and beadmaking seeped into the bedrock of South Asian life. But second, and perhaps more powerful, is their legacy as a question. They stand as a profound alternative model of ancient complexity. They achieved staggering urban sophistication without apparent autocrats, massive coordination without grandiose monuments to power, and international trade without vast armies of conquest. In our world, often fixated on kings, conquests, and loud declarations of power, the Indus whispers a different possibility. It suggests that order can emerge from consensus, that greatness can be measured in public health and fair weights, and that a civilization's most enduring monument might be the quiet dignity of a well-built home, connected to a clean drain. They challenge us to listen not for the shout of a ruler, but for the hum of a well-run society. As we drift towards sleep, let the image of their orderly streets, their meticulous seals, and their silent script linger. They remind us that history holds many lost chords, and that some of the most beautiful music was played in a key we are still learning to hear. The hum of that well-run society may have faded, but its resonance never truly ceased. To think of the Indus Valley civilization as a closed book, its final page written around 1300 BC, is to misunderstand the nature of cultural memory. Its conclusion was not an expiration, but a diffusion. Like a river delta spreading its fertile silt across a wide plain, the knowledge, technologies, and sensibilities of the Indus people dispersed, seeding the future of the subcontinent in ways both obvious and subtle. Consider the practical arts. The sophisticated hydraulic engineering that managed monsoon floods and stored precious water in places like Dhalavira did not vanish with the cities. That deep understanding of gradients, drainage, and reservoir construction became part of the subcontinent's toolkit. Centuries later, when large-scale urban planning re-emerged under the Mauryan Empire or in the sophisticated stepwells of Gujarat and Rajasthan, one can sense an echo of that ancient, pragmatic genius for water control. It was knowledge preserved not in libraries, but in the muscle memory of well diggers and the inherited wisdom of village elders. Their agricultural legacy was even more enduring. The package of crops they had perfected, the drought-resistant millets, the hardy pulses, the cotton whose fluffy bolls they were among the first to spin into cloth, formed the backbone of peninsular Indian farming for millennia. The domestication of the zebu cattle and the water buffalo was irreversible. These animals became inseparable partners in the agrarian life of South Asia. Every plow pulled by a buffalo in a Punjabi field today continues a partnership first formalized in the proto-villages of Balochistan 7,000 years ago. Perhaps their most profound, unspoken legacy was an idea that urban life could be organized for collective benefit. The stark absence of palatial complexes or aggrandizing temples, contrasted with the overwhelming investment in civic infrastructure, presents a radical model. It whispers that a society's greatest achievement can be the welfare of its ordinary citizens, assuring them clean water, effective sanitation, private homes, and standardized fairness in the marketplace. This ethos of civic care, eroded though it may have been in their later days, left an indelible mark on the subcontinent's urban imagination. Their story, rediscovered brick by brick and bead by bead, also revolutionized our understanding of history itself. Before its discovery, the narrative of early Indian civilization began with the Vedic texts, with chariot-riding migrants and poetic hymns. The Indus cities proved that a sophisticated, indigenous urban tradition predated that world by over 1,000 years. It forced a dramatic lengthening and deepening of South Asia's historical timeline. The subcontinent was not a late bloomer. It was a cradle, one of the very first. Today, the challenges of preservation are immense. The very bricks that testify to their genius are threatened by salt crystallization, groundwater, and the pressures of a modern world. Conservation is a race against time and elements. Yet, new technologies offer hope. Satellite archaeology reveals lost settlements under desert sands. Genetic studies of skeletal remains, though challenging, may someday trace lineages. Computational linguists still wrestle with the script, employing AI to find patterns in the silence. The Indus civilization endures not as a dead relic, but as a living question. It asks us to expand our definition of power. Where we often look for the flash of conquest and the pyramid of absolute rule, they offer the steady glow of managed prosperity and the grid of shared order. In a world still struggling with urban planning, water scarcity, and social equity, their solutions, born over 4 millennia ago, feel unervingly relevant. So, as we leave the windswept mounds and the silent streets, we carry with us the image of a different kind of ancient world. A world where a merchant's seal guaranteed quality across 1,000 miles, where every house, large or small, connected to a common drain, and where a city's grandeur was measured in the predictability of its water supply and the fairness of its weights. They built for the ages, not by carving their names into stone, but by baking the principle of order into every brick. Their voice may be lost to us, a whisper in an unknown language, but their architecture still speaks. It speaks of a profound belief in community, in system, in balance. It is a voice from the dawn of urban life, reminding us that the foundation of any lasting civilization is not the glory of its few, but the dignity, health, and fair measure afforded to its many. Let that quiet, profound thought settle over you as you drift into rest. Thank you for exploring the depths of time with Sleepy Owl. If this journey into a lost world brought you peace and wonder, please share it with someone else who might need a story to unwind to. Until next time, good night.